welcome to another episode of What Are You Selling with me, David Green. I am with Nikki DeKeuster, who is here to talk to us about book one in Bittersweet Empathy, The Spiral. And Nikki, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. This is my very first interview about my book. So David has been calming my nerves behind the scenes. And I'm excited. I don't have any idea what to expect with this process. I'm just sort of learning as I go, you know.
Yeah, that is part of the process I have found in the last year or so. It's just like, we'll just see what happens.
I'm gonna write this story, and some people actually read it and liked it. So people are encouraging me,
Yeah,
for better or worse.
Yeah, it's doing really well. Like the reviews have been coming in. Like I've been keeping an eye on them on Goodreads, and they've been like overwhelmingly positive so far.
Well, and some of them are from people who don't know me at all, which is great. You know what I mean? Like that's like they don't have, well, you know how it is. You get the author effect. You know them, you like them, whatever. I don't care. You're getting a bump if I like you. You know, it doesn't matter. But to have people that don't know you, you know, also just because all they have is the story, that, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So we'll get into talking about the story pretty soon, and how it all kind of like came about, and like where this twisted story. Because you're very innocent looking.
Yes.
that laugh was not. But we'll get into it. But people that are watching on YouTube or listening to us on the Guild podcast, give us a subscribe or give us a follow if this is the first time that you are here. And all of Nikki's links will also be in the show comments. So go and follow all those things as well, and check out the book, obviously, if you haven't already. So this book, Bittersweet Empathy, The Spiral, there it is. It's a beautiful cover. It's really good. And it's that's the matte version as well, isn't it?
Yeah, this one's the mattes. All of my it actually comes in glossy. This was my test.
Yes, you said.
And I decided I didn't like the matte, but it works really well for like, you know.
The matte ones look good on camera.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
there you go. It's a great.
But I don't have one that's shiny yet.
Yeah.
Without the band in it, I mean.
Yeah. So when we'll skip ahead right to the end of this kind of like process that you did. When those books arrived at your house, how did you feel?
Elated. Like I've been over with you. I'm sorry about that. A 7-year process from the time that I decided to seriously try to write this up until, you know, it's in my hands now. So just seeing it all look like an actual book, indescribable.
Yeah. And did you take a little bit of a moment just to kind of be like, well, you know what, I've done this, and like congratulate yourself on, because I don't do that. I'm really bad at doing it, and I'm always like,
What's the next thing we have to do, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it
exactly.
is. It's constant. Didn't take a moment. I kind of did a little bit of both. Like I took half a moment. This is what I would say, to just sort of be with it and snuggle it, you know. But then it's always the next thing. What do I have to do? And I'm not the greatest planner. So I'm like, Nikki, there's things you have to be on top of now. You know, you got to make sure that you have your editor scheduled out and all this stuff. And so that's why I kind of just bit the bullet on my release dates. I originally wanted this to be done in 2020, but you know how that year turned out. So I promised myself I would get it done by the end of 2021.
Yeah.
So it got to be December, and I was like, just gonna do it.
December 1st, it came out. It's a great time to release something. Because I think the thing is as well, I thought it was really clever of you to bring it out after Thanksgiving and after Black Friday and all that kind of stuff, because there's so many people. Like I was looking online and stuff, like friends and all that kind of stuff. Everyone had sales on the books over Thanksgiving and Black Friday, and it was like, I think just taking that extra like week to bring it out was a good move, I think.
Yes, genius.
It's like it was on camera.
Well, I knew I didn't want to do Halloween because that's
Yeah,
when
exactly the
all
same.
of the horror comes out, right? So
Yeah.
then it was the next logical one was the next.
Was that, yeah. So, how would, yeah, I've never actually asked you this because obviously it's horror, like it's horror, but it's not, I mean, it's not extreme horror. It's not even kind of Stephen King kind of horror. It's very, very different. It's very unique, is what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to get
Like
to.
psychological horror,
Yeah.
paranormal psychological horror / thriller
Yes.
is the category that I think it fits in. But I've had it said, and you saw the reviews many times, the genre defies definition. So it's
Yes.
going to be a challenge for me to find my correct audience, I think, because I just wrote her story, and I didn't, when I started it, I just started it, and I didn't think about genre. It was barely a twinkle in my eye selling it or anything like that. I just wrote it. And so it starts off more coming of age. Like I've had people say it's more of like almost a YA feel, but it's very much not. And so you
No.
say I look innocent, right?
Yeah.
You're commenting on that.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing. Like it starts out more innocent. Like it's an innocent, two best friends ghost hunting. They're having a good time, getting into trouble. And then, suddenly the main character is struck with the ability to feel other people's emotions and even animals.
Yeah.
And she has no idea why. It kind of sneaks up subtly. And that's something about this book and this series is I tried to be subtle in a lot of ways. There's things that will come in like a wrecking ball
Yeah.
in a few places.
Literally in a few places.
Yeah, literally. But it's more her coming to terms in the beginning with what this is, if it's really a thing. So that's kind of where the psychological comes in. Is it in her head? Is it a real thing? Because you can imagine, I can feel your emotions, David. I can feel them.
Yeah.
Sure, Nikki. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then from there, like it starts to escalate and she figures out she can control people's emotions. And so I have a fair bit of fun, as you can imagine. So it's a fun book too, right? I've had that said. Like it's
funny,
just it's fun, it's funny.
Yeah.
But not in a campy way.
No, it's very real. Like, I mean, when I was like, obviously, I read it sort of very late beta stage, I suppose. It was later in the day. It was probably just at the end of this summer, I think I read it.
Yes.
And, it's very, obviously you have these supernatural and paranormal elements to it, and there's a mystery element to it as well. And then you do have these elements of horror and everything, but it's very, very grounded because, like, I mean, at the center is, like, as you say, there is like coming of age story at the center of it as well. And Amy's relationship with her best friend, and her maybe new boyfriend who comes on the scene, and all this sort of stuff. It's very, very grounded.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, it's important when you go into a story that kind of then goes into very, very unexpected territory that this one does.
Yeah, you've got to have that baseline.
Yeah. So when did you get the idea for this story? Because obviously, you said before it was like 7 years in the making. So is it something that was like living in your head before?
Well, no, actually, obviously, yes, she's a character, but I have been a role player, like tabletop role playing for 20 years. I'm a storyteller, so that's why I have storyteller Nikki DeKeuster and not writer.
Yeah.
And I'm also a writer now, so an author and all that stuff. But I guess I come at it from a character-based focus, both as a player and when you run games, you have to be everyone, right? And so I kind of honed the ability to get down into those characters quickly because you're all sitting around, you're drinking, you're having fun. Like it's a social thing. I mean, you don't have to drink to role play, but it helps. And so, you know, you get together with your friends, you pick a game, and you go from there. And so Amy came about as a game character for a game. I don't have, I can get into it if you want, but I've changed it significantly since then. But one of the things that you do in role playing oftentimes is you'll come up with a backstory, and you give that to the whoever's running the game, and then they can weave it in as they see fit.
Yeah.
And so I sat down to do Amy's backstory, and something clicked, like from the moment that I started typing. And I'd done a lot of backstories before, so I've always sort of been writing, you know, for my characters. But there's something about her story, like her voice in my head resonated. And when I presented my backstory to the group, they were like, oh my God, like they were my first encouragers.
Right, okay.
Like there's something here, right? And that was just my very first little blah, blah, blah. I hadn't studied writing. I had no idea about any of the techniques or anything like that. So I agreed, and it sort of stayed with me. And that was, I don't know, 11 years ago at this point. So the story stayed with me, and I was like, I should write that. I should. And life gets in the way, you know, things happen, you have other priorities. And then 7 years ago, I sat down and I was like, my daughter was born. I couldn't role play anymore because taking her with, it was just not working.
Yeah.
So it kind of became my outlet for that. And I was like, you know, I've been wanting to write this story. Let's see what happens.
Right. Yeah. And a book happened in the end of it.
A book happened.
And it's a series, like you said, and obviously, not to get into any kind of spoilers, the ending of the book heavily sets up a direction where the story is going to go, and that was something that again, don't want to get into spoilers or anything, but that's something that really kind of interested me, because I do enjoy a kind of secret kind of thing that's going on underneath the whole of the story, where there's like, you know, and you do a lot of really good kind of misdirection where people there's a sequence towards, like, maybe as you get into the final act, where one of the characters is talking about like being spied on and all this other stuff, and you just kind of like be like, oh, this guy has just lost his mind, right? And everything in the book, from what I remember from when I was reading that, and that made me kind of go back and kind of look at things and examine things again and say, like, you know, everything counts in this book. Every kind of little kind of like throwaway line really counts towards something that was going on. So you said before you don't really have much of a plan, but obviously you do have a plan for this series.
For the story, yeah. And I would say that I have the main points, but you know how it is. You get into it, the characters do what they're gonna do, and I roll with it. So it's one thing that, again, the role playing really helped with is when you're running a game and a player says that they want to do something, you're like, you know, well, roll your die. Does your die say you can or can't or whatever? And if it's cool, let it happen. It's kind of like raising kids. You know, is this really going to matter? It's just a mess. I'll clean it up later.
Yeah, you know, you got to learn. You only learn by doing the thing, right?
Yeah. And so I listen to my characters, right? No matter who they are, they can be a secondary, tertiary character. And if they speak up and say, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't do that way.
Yeah.
I will change the whole thing. As long as the main beats get hit, that's what I care about. And I'll work with them and be like, well, I need to get here. I don't care how we get there. How, you know, work with me. And every time it comes out better, well, in my opinion. So I decided to go with. And to give an example, the character of Kayla, so the best friend of the main character, Amy, was only supposed to be like in my original outline and in my head for years. She was there for the first little bit. And then when Amy starts having these, you know, feeling people's emotions, she backs away.
Okay.
So in the original, she was like okay,
Right, right.
you're freaking me out. I'm out of here. And I wrote the first chapter and started to get to know Kayla a little bit better.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, she basically looked me in the eyes and was like, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
That's good.
there's no way in what you have just written. Like you either got to scrap it and write me different,
Yeah.
or,
Oh,
work me into the story.
yeah.
And so I was like, you're right. The way that I wrote you,
Yeah, exactly.
you're not going anywhere. So let's work with this. And she became a favorite.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
an
that
absolute
relationship really
favorite.
works. Yeah, that relationship really, really works. Like I
It
can
does.
see, I can see when you're saying it, I can see a version of it where she does back away, because that would kind of the way that like kind of Amy's journey then goes with other people, that would kind of work okay with that as well. But I think the way that you've done it, where Kayla is still there for Amy regardless, but also has the reservations about other things, works really well. 'Cause it's more, again, it's more real, it's more natural, because
It is.
these
Yeah.
two are best friends, and like they'll do anything for each other.
And even when they do get into their fights, it's resolved.
Yeah, the
Like
result pretty
it's not
quickly.
just
Yeah.
drama for the sake of drama. Like it's
Yeah. So, with the rest of the series, like, how long did you know that it was going to be a series? And again, not going into kind of spoilers, but like, the hook that you leave at the end, how was that like part of the plan from the start, or was that something that?
yeah. So one way to look at this big old,
It is a big book. Yeah.
it's 127,000 words, which is on the longer end for a horror novel, but not too out there.
Yeah.
And this is basically her backstory.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
where we're picking up in book 2 is going to be loosely based on the game that I played.
Right. Okay.
Not directly, but influenced, shall we say.
I can see that influence very. Yeah. I can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in keeping with my genre mixing, it's going to start one way and end another because I don't like to stay put.
Yeah.
So it starts off as coming of age, sort of almost YA, but there's too much cursing and talk about sex to fully be there.
And not just talk about sex either.
Not talk about sex. Yes, there's sex in it. Like I put my decision to put that content warning up there was to keep people who don't want to read this at bay.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse than getting into a book and being like, oh my God, completely blindsided, right? If you're not into it for that.
Yeah, if you're that kind of person, yeah. I could
clutching pearls.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Especially the church going crowd, because Amy's.
Although I will say one of my very early alpha readers was a pastor. And she read that scene and she was like, I should be offended, but you've done such a damn good job that I can't help it. She's like, I kind of want to strangle these two.
Yeah.
But I'm also sort of cheering them on. And I was like,
You've converted them. You've converted the church going crowd.
But I don't know if I finished answering the question or not. Oh, about the series, because you asked how.
When did you decide it was going to be a series? Like, was that from day one?
I figured it would probably be a trilogy.
Okay.
Like when I first started it, that was in my head, and then that would be it.
Yeah.
And then as I got going, I was a little bit of a ways into it, and I was like, ooh, I can keep going with this. And so the story has expanded significantly. I mean, I'm looking at probably 9 books, maybe even a little bit more, but I'm just putting 9 out there. And so I do have this, and now that I've dived into writing and I understand a little bit more about arcs, right? And all of this behind the scenes stuff that you got to make sure is in place. I did have to do a little bit of an overhaul even partway through to go, oh, I got to do these things or it's not going to be a satisfying standalone experience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I was looking at the big picture.
Mhm.
There's one of the characters that comes in early on, and originally she's the one that Amy meets in the bathroom, we'll just say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And she originally was not supposed to be much more than a cameo. So again, to talk about where the book goes in directions.
Yeah.
And so you just think, you're like, well, where could this go? Let's have fun with it. You know, so you know the overarching, but then again, how you get there
Yes.
is where the fun comes in for us as writers, right? If you knew everything, I don't know, if I knew everything, I'd get bored.
Yeah, exactly. And she's used really, really well as well, because you use that character sparingly and you use her at the right times. And what I liked about her as well with her storyline is that you think at one point it's going to go a certain way, and then it goes into a very kind of unexpected place, and then it goes into an even more unexpected place after. So it's like, yeah, but then the thread is there as well. Like say, like when a lot of the things in it, when you get to a point in this certain a few times when you kind of come to certain resolutions in this book, you think back and you're like, oh yeah, you know what, that was there all along. Like it was very, very carefully planned, which I thought it's a very well written book, obviously.
I'm always aware. So it's taken me so long, but I take super care of every sentence to the point of lunacy, to be quite honest with you. It's something that I kind of need to hone a little bit more.
Don't change it. I like
don't change it.
I like it. It's fine.
But I delight in that kind of stuff, the little innuendos. It's what makes me really happy. And it's the passion that I put into the story when I can be like, ooh, I said this and it could mean this, this, and this. You know, check. I love playing with words, you know. And that's a trick too, to like play with the language, but not get so far out there that you lose people. You know what I mean? With the purple prose and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't you kind of tell me a little, just you know, the synopsis about the book. Say you're on a Jimmy Kimmel or whoever it is that's in America, Jimmy Fallon or whatever, and you're talking about your book and you've got to give the audience a little taster. What would you say is it about?
Well, it's about an apathetic teenage girl who is suddenly struck with the ability to feel emotions and like a haphazard control over people's emotions too. So it like sneaks up. And there's more to it than that, but and she kind of struggles to figure all this stuff out before her sixth sense becomes her only sense.
Yes.
That's the real kind of condensed version, but at its core, it's about one of the questions that I wanted to explore with this character at the time was what love is. And you'll see that as a heavy thread throughout, you know, not only the book, but as the series continues. And what lengths we're willing to go for love, what it looks like in all of its different forms. And, you know, when you add horror into that element, like it's something that you don't often see. At least I haven't. I've been trying for years to come up with comparable titles and failing. So if somebody ever reads it and can say, hey, I read this other thing like it, let me know.
Yeah,
I would like to read
it. It's quite unique. I mean, I saw some like, not really influences, but I saw some things that would have been, you know, there's a little bit of Twin Peaks in there. There's a little bit like that I saw that I was, but you know, people read things, they put their own kind of bias onto them anyway. So it's like, you know, I saw someone review Dead Man Walking the other day, and they gave it like 4 stars and said they enjoyed it, but they're like, well, it was too much like, it was very like Sandman Slim. But I've never read that. There it is. That's the original one there. Yeah. But like I'd never read it, and like so it was one of those things. It's like, you know, it's
so you're tapping into some sort of vein.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So like, you know, I saw like a little bit of Twin Peaks. I saw a little bit of I don't know if you probably are a video game, but there's a game that was out called Life is Strange. I don't know if you've heard.
Yes.
Yeah, I got like a little bit of a vibe from that. But there's so many other things in it that was just very, very fresh and unique. And one of the things that I liked about it was that you do a lot of work on unreliable narrator.
Yes. It's almost, well, it's not even almost. I've had this said a few times and I would agree with it. It's a different book the second time through.
Yeah.
Like knowing the ending and then rereading it, it's a completely different experience for a lot of people. You know,
Yeah.
there might be some savvy people that pick up on all the little tiny details along the way and are like, wait a second. Because you're right. Like, you got to pay attention or you'll miss, you know, Amy will say one thing and interpret it one way, but that might not necessarily be what's happening. And that's part of my fun too. Like, I love those kind of characters.
Yeah, well, she's a great. I mean, she's a great character, and obviously you know her so well. And we can talk about how well you know characters in a second. But it's almost as if like she is fooling herself at some bits. Like she has this intuition where she's like, you know what, this is this situation, but I want it to be different, and I want to believe it's this way.
Yes, she
And
fools
then
herself.
yeah, and then because we're seeing it from her, she's telling us the story. We have to go along with that ride where she's like, no, this is the way. This is the way. Other people tell me this, but this is the way. I'm sure of it. And it's interesting because you kind of there's so many different kind of ways where you think. I know as me when I was reading that, I was kind of like, this is the situation with this person, and I'm convinced this is what this person is, or this or whatever. But then I was like, actually, no, I'm just seeing it from her point of view, and it could be something completely different.
Because then, like, some characters will say something, and it's like, did that just come out of his mouth?
Yeah. Yeah.
What? You know, wait a second.
Yeah.
And then you start to rethink.
She kind of sees herself as a victim quite a lot as well, which was and obviously because you spend so much time in her head, you're kind of on her side a little bit. But then, so when she's interacting with some people, and you're thinking, oh god, this person's like a dick, or this person's this. But then they say something that's quite reasonable, or they'll say something like, you know, why are you always like this to her? And she's like, what are you on about? Why am I like this? And then you're kind of like, well, actually, yeah, she is like this.
Yeah, and everybody's kind of a shade of gray.
Yeah,
is what I would say. I like characters that, I mean, there's some that are darker shades of gray and some that are lighter, but they all have their ups and downs, I think.
yeah,
and I delight in that too. I don't like two-dimensional characters. You know, I like there to be nuance.
Well, there's a lot of nuance in this. I think there's a lot of it. I wanted to, before we talk about the characters in particular, I wanted to talk to you about a particular sequence. And again, we can't really go into like specific details in it because obviously don't.
I know it's so hard not to spoil it. Let's just blurt it all out.
I know. Let's just tell everyone. But it was such a ambitious sequence of events because it's so trippy, and it's the bit where. I mean, you know where it is already. Like I don't even have to say what it is. So I just for people listening and watching, it's as you said before when you kind of the kind of what it's about when you said how her new sense will become her only sense.
Yeah.
There's a bit in the book where her new powers kind of spiral out of control more than at any point before, and it leads to this extreme sequence where. And it goes on for a little while, like it moves into various different places, and there's just a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of just misinformation coming through, but it's all deliberate because it's all from her point of view, obviously.
Yeah, it's an immersive book.
Yeah.
It's an immersive. I went for the immersive style.
Yeah, and it's such a well written sequence because you are disorientated by it and you are confused by it. But also it tracks really, really well, and you know where you are at each stage. And at the end of this particular sequence, you understand it when the character understands it, or when she starts to begin to understand it. How long did it take? How much work did you put into that?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know Jennifer Hatfield, right?
I do, yes.
A lot of people who are watching this probably know her
Hi,
to some
Jen.
degree.
I'm sure she might
Yes,
watch
hi Jennifer.
it.
She can attest because she was my alpha reader chapter by chapter. So she got to see the very early version of it, and it was tricky. It was very tricky.
Yeah.
There was a point where it took me 6 months to claw through that
Okay.
and try to really, and I'd scrap stuff and rewrite it. Obviously I have other things going on too. It's not 8 hours a day for 6 months, but like it took a while. And it was frustrating because I was trying to like strike that balance between having you be there and confused with her, but not being so confused that you're like, throwing the book across the room.
That's the danger, and that's what I thought was so skillful about that sequence, was it was that fine line of people just skim reading it, because it'll be like, I just don't understand what's going on. Big Boy was an important sequence because you had to really
so important
what's going on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was really impressed. I mean, I was impressed with the whole book, obviously, but that part, that in particular, was such a skillful bit of writing, because it would have been skillful enough if it was just set in one location, but it goes across a variety of locations as well.
Yeah, and she sort of, well, I mean, this isn't a spoiler, I think. It talks about her sixth sense becoming her only sense. Well, there comes a point in time where she starts losing her abilities with her other senses and has to rely on different ones in different ways. And yeah, we'll just say that. I don't think that gets too spoilery. No, but there's an element of synesthesia, if you know what that is, to it, which is one of my favorite words. Yeah. Synesthesia. Yeah. So I had fun with it, but it was also an extreme challenge, probably one of the most challenging parts of the book.
Yeah, I can see it. Like, I mean, I think it's one of those things. Like, obviously, you've been writing for a while, and you've done short stories, and you've done travels, and you edit for people, and you do that. So it's not like you're like a novice or anything, but for like a first time, I think, like, if someone just picked this book up that had no idea who you were or anything, and was like first time author, they'd be very surprised that wasn't a first time author's book, because it's very ambitious.
It was. When I got to it, I was like, oh, I got to write this thing. So because an outline, it's like, this happens.
Yes.
Well, and then there's the scene right before it. So there's something that happens with her father at the end. Mm-hmm. And he was another one who didn't want to cooperate with what I originally had planned. Right. And it ended up going, I think, in a much better direction. So there's supposed to be a bigger fight at the end. Okay. Then he ends up going in a more loving direction, which made sense. Again, if you think about how Kayla's story changed, it affects everything. So Kayla staying in that book affects everything going thereafter. She's like a wave, right? Yeah. So, yeah, that's all I'll say. Yeah, I know that's so vague.
Yeah, he's a very interesting character as well, though. And what I like about all the characters in this book, they all have their own lives. They're not just there to serve Amy's story, like, and they are there to affect the story and everything, but also, that, like, her father, for example, or her mother, who she has a very interesting relationship with, that when they're not on the page, when they exit a scene, they've gone off and they're doing their own lives.
Yeah, that was important to me too. Like, so the mother is kind of a villain from Amy's point of view, right? Yeah. Especially early on.
Yeah.
But as you said, there's nuance to it, because then as a mother, you can look at it from the mother's point of view and be like, well, that's perfectly reasonable. Yeah. But from Amy's point of view, as a 16-year-old girl, oh my goodness,
Yeah, exactly.
It's the
Yeah,
worst thing ever,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's like the daughter of Cruella de Vil or something like that, you know?
Yes, her mother is interesting, but like they have a complicated relationship
Yeah,
too. Like you said, there's kind of a villainous aspect, but then she's also there for her in other ways,
she is,
right?
yeah. And she's not had the easiest of times either. And also then as well, when you kind of delve more into Amy's abilities, and obviously Amy ponders this question herself quite a few times. It's like, how much is this person, or how much is it actually me doing this to
Yeah.
them?
How much is them reacting because it's them, and how much because of what I was running around having fun doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine you can have control over people's emotions at 16.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
having no idea what to do about it as well, just be like trial and error with people's emotions, which is, it's natural because that's what people would do. They push and see how far they can go before there's a disaster.
Hmm. Yeah, people in general, but definitely teenagers. That's one thing too that I tried to keep in mind, and with all of my characters and everything that I've ever written or played in. Um, they have merits and they have flaws,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So these powers, such as they are great to an extent, but I'm always like, well, what could go wrong?
Yeah,
Where could this go in a direction and a twist that
yeah,
she isn't foreseeing, and I don't do it absolutely every time. Like sometimes things do work out because otherwise it gets too
yeah,
oppressive.
exactly.
But a lot of times it's like, well, that went sideways. Now
Yeah,
we got to fix that, or,
yeah. You have to think that way though. You have to think when you create something like that, or you put someone in a situation, you have to think, oh, what is the worst possible thing that could happen?
well, yeah. And then with Amy, it's kind of like, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions, coming to bite me.
Yeah, exactly. So how much? I mean, obviously you know this character so well. You created her 11 years ago. Um, you've been writing her story for the last 7 years, and you've been doing it for a lot longer because you got 9 books at least to write about it. Yeah.
Right.
How much of her is you, and how much of you is her? Because I mean, there's a fair amount of you in that character. I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, that happens with any character, especially a
Yeah.
main character. You can only see the world how you see it. But I will say that I think there's a fair amount of me in probably every character
Right.
in this. I don't tend to overly like put, like some writers will pick a person and they'll model that character after them. I pick bits, is what I
Yeah.
would say. So there's bits of me and Amy, there's bits of me and Kayla, there's bits of me and Daniel, and bits of me and Mother, and all of this. But
Scary thought.
a scary thought that there's bits of me and Daniel.
Daniel and the mother. Jeez.
And the Mother, yes. Um, so I guess there's an innocence, like you said, to Amy, an innocent worldview that kind of gets shaken as the book goes on. And I'd say I resonate with that,
Yeah. She has a very quirky sense of humor as well.
Yes. Humor is so important to me. Like, especially in horror. Like if you're gonna go to these really dark places, you gotta have the light,
Yeah.
and it has to be equal to it. So, and not only that, there's a quote that I saw pretty early on in my writing journey that just stuck with me. I have it saved on my computer, and it's um, first give them beauty and then give them darkness.
Okay.
And so that's, I guess, the essence of why people see it as more of a YA coming of age in the beginning,
Yeah.
because it's just the innocence, it's the light, it's the fun, it's the love,
Yeah.
and then we take it through this journey into a very dark place by the end. Like,
Yeah. It's definitely not why by the end of it. I think that's one of the things though, is like I think when you write about a teenager, and especially the way that you start it, which is two teenage girls on an adventure, pretty much, getting up to no good.
Breaking and entering, right?
Into a barn that's in like, the middle of nowhere and everything. I mean, that is like something that people would read and they'd be like, oh yeah, I get this. I know what this is. I know what to expect.
But they don't. Yeah.
They don't know what to expect.
They don't. They don't know what to expect.
No.
Yeah, and that's going to be the challenge to get people to understand that it twists and twists and twists and twists. Yeah. And it starts out in one genre and it ends in another.
That's the way it is these days, though, because it's. I mean, I was talking to I was interviewing an author called Rachel Renner. I think you probably saw the
yes,
video.
Yeah. And I watch your interviews.
Yeah, and she's similar. I mean, she doesn't write horror; she writes kind of fantasy. But she has like a book called "The Girl Who Talks to Ashes," which was. You get that kind of same thing a bit. You think, oh yeah, this is YA, but then it just changes and it changes and it changes and it changes. And that was one of those things as well of getting the cover right for it. And she changed the cover. I obviously changed my cover for the Halloran books as well because the covers were a little bit too much in one way. But that's the good thing about yours is that when you look at the cover of it, you're like, well, this is definitely a horror story.
Yeah, like if people can see that. Yeah, that should come across okay. But yeah, I'm like, I need blood, I need fear in her eye. These are things that I worked on. I was wondering if I should maybe have my cover designer make the smoke a little bit more glowing. I don't know, because I've been uploading my book all over the place. I'm looking at the other little thumbnails, and I'm like,
yeah.
I might. So there might be like a revision at some point. But I have to do the hardback too. So.
Of course. So what was probably we'll start wrapping this up in a second, but I could talk to you all day, but obviously we can't do that, unfortunately.
Yes.
But if we always talked about the scene that was really challenging to write and everything. What was something that completely surprised you by this? Because obviously you said before how you have certain things that you want to hit on, but then you'll see what happens as well. A lot of things, and like obviously some characters were like, I want to stay around for longer, and some of them were like, I want to do this and do this. What was the thing that kind of surprised you the most over the 7 years of writing this?
Well, I would say the Kayla.
Yeah.
That was a big one. Kayla staying in the story and affecting it to the extent that she did. But I guess also just that I was able to, like on a bigger picture, that I was able to have other people understand, like to read this thing and come out of it with an understanding of what happened. Because, there's part of me that's like, I don't know, does this make any sense?
Yeah, you have to do as well. When I gave you like my notes and I didn't really mention that particular scene, and you were like, "What did you understand that scene?" Because you must have had people commenting on that one quite.
Yes, I wrote it. It took me a while to tweak, and then I had to subsequently tweak it even further because I'm like, okay, and I like to be subtle, like I said. So I had to really like go, well, I gotta tell them. I like to show, I guess. I err more on the side of showing than telling. But there's a place for telling too, right?
Yeah.
So I had to find those sweet spots of when to tell them just straight out what's happening, at least from her point of view.
Yeah.
And then pull it back and, because it like you said, it's a long sequence at the end that spans several locations. And a lot happens, we'll just say, obviously. Yeah. It's the climax of the book, but then it's also horror. So there's, the trope of it's the climax, but then there's another climax.
There is. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a more of a that's kind of like that's kind of the climax where everything's kind of been building to like an event, but then there's like a kind of more of a plot-based emotional climax afterwards as well.
Yeah, I would say. So yeah, just it surprised me, I guess, just overall that it came together. There you go.
Well, it's great. It's great that it's getting such good reviews, and long may it continue. And for anyone that is watching or listening, again, in the show notes will be where you can get this book. You can get it from Amazon. You can get it from all of the places, and also if you you can get signed copies of Nikki. So why don't you tell them a little bit about that, because you're doing some signed copies, aren't you?
Yeah. So for the next about 2 weeks, I'm just opening the door for people if they want signed copies. You know, I'll send them out even internationally. But what I'm asking is for people to buy the ebook so that I get the sales bump, right? Because I'm a brand new author. Although I have been writing, like you said, I am published in other things, but this is my first baby, my first novel. And then like I'll take that off the cost of shipping, basically.
Yeah.
It's kind of my happy medium, and then they can contact me about purchasing it, and then we'll get that all set up. I also wanted to say, I should mention, so it's all about this novel right now, but I also released at the same time, I still got the little bar on it, but there's this little novelette. And you can get this story for free for signing up for my newsletter. So you can test me out, see if you like my writing style. That's kind of what I figured. I don't know that you read this one, have you? Did you?
So.
I think you did.
Did
I don't know.
I've seen the cover. You showed me the cover ages ago. So, I mean, that's what it was.
And there's a tie-in with this to the series.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
it's my reader magnet, basically. But I also wanted to print one because I like physical.
Why not? Why wouldn't you?
I like my soul to be manifest. So that's what I'll say too. I put my heart and soul into this book, into trying to make it the best that I possibly could, learning the craft all this time and taking care with all of the characters and everything, a little to the point of insanity, probably, but I feel good about that, that I've put everything that I can into it, and it's out there now. And that's one of the hardest things for me to do, is put my stuff out there. So the Drabbles that we met doing, right? Yeah. Just to do that 100-word story that's out there was like a leap for me.
Right.
And so it was a helpful little step. I was like, I put it out there. People read it and they liked it, So.
Well, you know what? I think it's a great book. I think it's a really superb achievement, and I think you should be very, very, very proud of it. So
thank you.
I hope it was really well for you.
Thank you very much. And this is my first interview, so I think it went well. You put me at ease, and I appreciate it, David.
No problem. Oh, well, thanks very much for coming on to the show, and everyone who's from home or on the podcast, please check Nikki out. All of the details will be in the show notes below, and definitely check out the newsletter and the book. Nikki, thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye, everybody.
See you till next time.